Hi there, and welcome to the Rough and Tumble Railway Company. Today I'll be discussing my methods for carving and coloring the rocks you see in front of you there. So let's go back a few steps and get started. Alright, here we have the basic foam installation. You can see this nice little yellow stuff slopping over in places. This is what I use to glue the foam blocks onto. It's basically that spray foam insulation in a can that you use to seal around windows or whatnot in construction. First I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools I use. Nothing horribly magic here, and I'm sure other things would work, but this is what I use. First of all, just your standard good old X-Acto knife. This is really good for sort of rough cutting and for taking out large chunks, because of course it's a very sharp blade. When you're actually getting into carving, it's sometimes less useful because the blade is so sharp it leaves a perfectly smooth, pristine edge, and which is not what we want. We want things a little cracky and craggy. So for that, just a very cheap kitchen knife. I got this one because it's just a very thin edge, you can see there, which makes it a lot easier to go through the foam, and it's nowhere near as sharp as the X-Acto knife, so as you're cutting it's kind of chipping and tearing at the foam a little bit, which gives you all sorts of neat little details that you otherwise couldn't carve. Also, just a very cheap paintbrush, and I've cut the bristles down very short so it's a nice stubby little brush. I use this on sort of flatter surface rocks. Bashing this into the foam gives it a really nice texture, and it kind of fractures the foam and gives it a little bit of a rough, pebbly texture as opposed to just smooth foam. We're going to start now. I'm going to be carving in this area right here. You can see I've got kind of a deep groove carved in here. There's going to be a little bit of a waterfall or a trickle of water coming down the rocks right here. So I've tried to make that a little deeper to make it look like the water's running in a V and not just kind of flowing over the surface. I've got some sort of angled strata lines here that are roughly matching the rocks I've done on either side of it. I'm just kind of making this stuff up. I'm sure if there are any geologists watching this, you're probably looking at my rock and saying, yeah, rock doesn't do that. But I'm just going for an illusion here, not geological perfection. It took the planet a few billion years to figure this out, so what hope do I have in a lifetime? Alright, you can see here all the joints I've got, which look quite ugly now, but quite often you can use them to your advantage. You can see right here this block sticks out farther than the other one, so I'm going to decide, well, that's a good place for a little crag. That line is way too straight, so what we're going to do is just get in here with the knife, and like I say, this knife's not very sharp, and just kind of twist it and screw it around and drag it, and you know, don't make anything straight. Rods are usually pretty lumpy. And once you've done that, go in from this side and carve in, and as you're carving up to that little joint, go past your initial cut. And the reason for that is now we've got a little undercut here, so when you go back with your knife and just chip off the corner like that. Now you're looking at kind of the wrong side here, but it'll chip up to your initial rock, and you'll get a nice sharp little fissure at the joint. Now obviously you can see that line here. We fill that up with plaster afterwards and try and blend it in, because that line is not part of our rocks, but it's something I have to live with now. Now we need to decide what we're going to do here. I just sort of go for it, get in there, start hacking, chopping, and as you go, it sort of follows its own path. So let's just get in there and have a go at it, alright? First thing you want to do is just break up the smooth surface of the foam. Rocks aren't perfectly flat, so just get in here. This is another good reason for the skinny knife. You can flex it a little bit sometimes and kind of carve it in a little dishing like that. This is sort of a concave area here, so it's a little harder to carve because you got to get the knife into it as opposed to carving a convex thing, which is much easier. And I've decided I'm going to have kind of a fissure going across here, so let's just carve in a little bit like that. Carve in up to it underneath. break off the pieces here. And where I've carved, you can see there's almost a line here, so I'm going to decide, oh, you know what, let's follow that and let's make another little crack in there. Then just go along and just pick at the seams you've made. This is the fun part about foam carving, is the foam fractures a lot like real rocks. So as you carve and just tear at the foam, you get all this neat little detail, little nubbly bits and stuff like that. These are very technical terms here, that if you were to hand carve each of those, you'd be here forever. But the foam just kind of does what it wants to do. And that's half your battle here. Do the same down here a little bit. And you can just draw in a few little extra cracks here and there where you think that perhaps the rock has cracked. Something like that. Get out the big brush and clean away all the swarf. And for these smooth areas here, I mean, it looks like someone's taken a knife and hacked through foam. The best way to deal with that is this little nubbly brush here, and just beat it. Beat the heck out of it. And you got to push pretty hard with this thing, and it imparts kind of a pebbly texture onto the styrofoam. And in some cases, if you really whack it, you can see there it's actually fracturing the styrofoam. And it puts all sorts of lovely little cracks and detail into it that you could otherwise not capture by actually carving it. Alright, I think that area is looking quite well. I'm going to move up and move down. That's for more of a smooth kind of a rock face, which I'm getting here. I'll show you later on how to do a more stratified look. One of the really nice things about the foam rocks is they're easy to modify. This little area I was carving before, I was looking at it now, and I've got too many strata lines. They're almost parallel. I don't like that, so I'm going to take this one here and I'm going to modify it a little bit. I'm going to go in with the knife and put a few scraggly cuts perpendicular to what I've done. Not exactly perpendicular, everything's... Always keep your knife wiggling and moving. You don't want any perfectly straight lines. We'll put a few in there. And now, when you start chipping this out, the foam will chip between those cuts, and you can get a really nice looking, scraggly, sort of fractured rock. And you just keep working. Every so often brush off the chips so you can see what you're doing. Maybe another little pop in there. And you can see underneath here where we've cut underneath there, when we chip to it, it chips to that line, so it looks like you've got sort of a one rock face chipping off of the other one. And maybe this crack here is a really deep one. Let's make it. We'll go with that a few times. And sometimes it's not necessarily best to clean out the crack entirely, but if you can see there's some little bits of foam stuck in there, and it looks just like some rocks have sort of split out of that crack but haven't yet fallen down. They're just hanging in there by whatever means necessary. And we'll go at it with my little brush again and just kind of bash it up a little bit. There, now I don't have a nice straight line that's parallel with the rest of it. I got this really detailed, craggy little split little face here, which looks much better, I think, to my eye. And that's half the battle, is just staring at it, looking at it, saying, okay, I like this part, I don't like that. Get in there with the knives, have at her, till you're happy with it. Now we're going to do some more stratified looking rocks. You can see here I've got some rocks with some very almost horizontal strata. You're kind of looking at them edge on here. They're actually leaning towards the camera a little bit. And I'm going to try and mirror that in this block here. Not quite as pronounced as this. This little area here is overhanging a trestle, so I want that to be quite dramatic looking. And if you make all the rocks dramatic, then none of them are dramatic. But we're going to kind of mirror that strata in this block here. So at roughly the same angle, we just start cutting into it. Again, keep the knife wiggling around. And this is partly cutting, partly tearing. Don't make all the lines perfectly parallel. Make some a little wider, a little narrower, and don't make them all the same spacing either. Sometimes you see in nature rocks that are very even and you've got all sorts of different types of jointing. The rocks come out looking just odd. They look too perfect, and in real life, you'll believe that. In a model railroad, at least in my humble opinion, I think they'll look odd. So once we've made a few large cracks in here, then we can start just chipping away up to the line. Sometimes you got to get in there, and then I'll just cut in a big fissure at an angle there up to that line. And maybe we'll do kind of a similar thing to this one. You're sort of half cutting, half tearing. Now you can start to see the strata lines coming in here. I think this one here needs to be a little smoother at the top. We're carving right up to my ceiling. This is the ceiling. I've got a low ceiling in my basement, so I have to contend with that. There we go. Now we're starting to get some strata in there. Let's carve this one going this direction. There, now you got a kind of a lump of rock sitting out there. Well, that's looking not too bad. It's still a little plain, a little even. So we'll put in some little smaller fissures. Not as deep, just in places. Chip a little out there. I think in here, this edge here should be nice and gnarly and split up. So let's cut in some more little bits and just have a go at that. And then we'll pop a few little pieces out there just to make it a little more even. Let's do the same here so it sort of matches. Alright, that's looking pretty good. This face here is still too smooth, I think. So hopefully I'm not getting in the way of the camera here, but I'm going to try and just carve that away a little bit so I don't have a perfectly flat, smooth surface. Reinstall some of these big fissures in here. There we go. Now we're getting a nice big crack in there. Now we're going to go at it with the old stubby brush. You saw that big piece just chip out of there. Too bad, so sad. That's good. That's half the magic of this foam carving, is it kind of does its own thing. Sometimes a little expected like that. If you're trying to carve an exact replica of a specific type of rock, that might bother you. For me, it works. Alright, there, I think that's looking pretty good. Now we're going to try and fill some of these unsightly cracks we've got here. All I've done is I've mixed up some hydrocal or plaster of Paris and mixed it up fairly thick so it'll stick to the end of a putty knife. And this is just a fairly simple process of squidging, that's a technical term, the plaster into these little cracks. You don't need to be too careful or neat about this, because once the plaster is sort of half set, you can sort of pick away at it and it'll chip away from the foam any place where it's not deeply embedded into the cracks. Just mix up a little bit of plaster at a time, maybe a quarter of a cup, maybe even less, because it dries in about 5 minutes. The working time is pretty short on this, which is good if you're in a hurry and impatient like me and don't like to wait around while things dry.